Thanks very much for your attendance and your attention. My name is Glenn Hodes again. I work with the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs in the Financing for Sustainable Development Office. And I'm here with a very distinguished panel. Starting at the very end from the right is Monsieur Massamba Thioye from the UNFCCC, and he is leading their Climate Change Global Innovation Hub. Next to him is Quyen, and I hope I'm doing a good job with your pronunciation, who is joining us from the IFC, and she is a product lead on climate finance and a senior expert on climate finance. Next to her, we have Nicolas Picchiottino, who is very involved, of course, in the head of the International Development Finance Club and also very active for Agence Française de Développement in some of their partnerships with the development bank community, like the Financing Common. And last but not least, I have Mr. Shanning, who is coming from China, from a bank, from the Bank of Jiangsu, which I guess is headquartered in Nanjing, which I've been to, a very lovely city. And we're delighted to have you to this dialogue, which is really about what we need to do to accelerate and catalyze more public and private cooperation for the climate agenda and also the 2030 agenda. I think the Building Bridges Summit opened up with a very...
Dear friends and colleagues, as 20...
Oh, okay. And then I'm going to move to the floor to help moderate. But the Building Bridges opening was very, very explicitly clear that we now are... It's very clear that we're not going to be able to achieve these agendas with public resources and through only a member, a member state driven solution. And I think that is why in the UN and the work that we're doing to support the upcoming 4th International Conference on Financing for Development, we're putting a very big accent on private sector engagement and private sector contributions in terms of the innovative thinking and the solutions that we need to really move the needle on catalyzing more investment and closing the SDG financing gap. So that's just a brief context. I'm going to go move now and thanks. I'm going to start with a question first directed for Nicolas, which is really looking at the global level. At COP29 in Baku, there was a set of recommendations around reforming climate finance, on scaling up to a $1.3 trillion per year sum. Also, we know the SDGs will require probably even far north of $4 trillion per year. So looking at that, what do you see as the ways in which partnerships, particularly at a global level, and looking at these sort of platforms like IDFC and FIX, in what way do you think that they can play a role in closing that gap and working to bring more mainstream and commercial investment into the picture? And then what about at the country level? How relevant is the replication of those platforms at country level?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. As you said, we had an agreement at COP, but the gap is huge, and we need to bridge it. And we do think with the that the public development banks can be part of the solution. So I'm here to represent IDFC, the International Development Finance Club. It's a club of 27 public development banks, and we are actually the biggest provider of climate climate finance in the world. Every year we provide on average $200 billion of climate finance, which is more or less 20% of the global financing we deliver. But also IDFC is the founding member of the broader coalition of the public development banks. You all know Finance in Common, representing the 530 public development banks, 25 trillion of assets and 2.5 trillion of financing every year, which is more or less 10% of the global financing. And if we just do a simple mathematical exercise, if we manage to have 20% of those 2.5 trillion that are green, we could reach immediately 500 billion of green financing. It's not enough to go to 1.3 trillion, and this is why we need the private sector, but it's still something. And we need to deliver, we need to bridge this gap quite rapidly. The good thing is we have 2025 ahead of us, and 2025 could be the year during which we will deliver. We identified 3 important milestones in this year, starting by the Finance in Common Summit. Every year we organize a summit. This year it's going to be in Cape Town, 26th to 28th of February, and all of you are invited, of course. For the first time, we will have the possibility to discuss with the G20, because we are organizing it at the same place, at the same moment of the first meeting of the financial ministers and the central bank governors of the G20. And the objective of this summit is to really define the architecture we need to bridge this gap. Of course, having the public development banks at the center of it, this is the objective, but also trying to better embed the private sector. Then, and it's good to have you, Glenn, because it's a UNDESA conference, but we will have this super important conference in Sevilla, Financing for Development number 4, 10 years after the last one that was in Addis Abeba. In this conference, I hope we will be able to set up a new framework for development and new instruments that should be delivered. And we do count on the United Nations and all the member states to enable us and to really set up this new framework. And then, hopefully, thanks to this, we should land to Belém with more ambition. It's going to be the COP of Brazil. You all know the importance of Brazil in protecting climate and biodiversity. You know also the really strong diplomatic skills of the Brazilian diplomacy. We all know that they want to achieve something. They want to bridge this gap. But having said that, we have 2025. This is good. But we have also different instruments that are on the table and that should be discussed during this year. You talk rightly, Glenn, about the country platform. So those initiatives that are country-led, and it's super important, that should come from the countries. And why they are important is because the country platform is a platform where the countries, thanks to their strategies, the long-term strategies, the NDC, we all know about that, they are creating a pipeline of projects and they just put it freely. And I believe it's super important, especially for the private sector, to know where and when to invest. And thanks to those country platforms, we hope that it will attract more investment coming from, of course, the MDBs and with concessionality, because we know that to finance nature and climate, we need some concessionality, but also for sustainable projects, the private sector. We had the very good example of Brazil this year. They issued the first country platforms, and it's also the kind of architecture we are pushing for, because with Brazil, the interesting thing is that they have the national development banks, BNDES, at the center of it, originating the project, but also receiving the funds and channeling the funds towards the already already identified sector. And maybe one last point about the fact that we also need to reconsider the way we do climate finance, and we are here hosted by UNEP FI. I wanted to highlight the paper we did issue at the last COP, IDFC, UNEP FI, but also PRI, on the fact that we need to consider transformational finance also as climate finance. It's super important to do a project-by-project financing, but it's also super important to finance the transformation of all the systems to be able to better finance climate. For the moment, the paper is endorsed by 40% of the financial sector, and of course, you are all welcome to read it and to endorse it if you want. Thank you very much.
I think that will be on everybody's Christmas holiday reading list. I downloaded it myself. I'm definitely planning on reading that. Sounds super interesting. Another just plug for things to read. My colleague who's here from DESA, Krishnan Sharma and Maria Katerina, we have a couple of these sort of QR code flyers. First of all, giving more detail about the business forum attached to the 4th Financing on Development Conference, but also on your reading list should be a summary report of all of the recommendations, both broadly we had over 300 stakeholder inputs for the key issues, laying out what will be negotiated in Spain. But specifically from the private sector, we have a paper which summarizes and distills like the most important recommendations for mobilizing and aligning more private investment for the climate and SDG agenda. So I think that should be on your reading list as well. But now let's turn to Shanning and understand, like, from a commercial bank's perspective, how do you see this? And what are some of the real challenges you face putting into practice, blended capital approaches for climate action and other development or inclusive development financing and investment? And where do you see the opportunities to scale up what's working?
Right. I'm very glad to be here, join the panel. And Jalan, I'm very glad you're one of the very few people who can say the name of my bank correctly and clearly. So Jiangsu is the province of China, next to Shanghai. So you can tell from the name, we start our business in the province of Jiangsu and we still had a quarter there. So we are a regional bank. We are one of the systemically important bank in China. We are one of the 24 big banks directly regulated by the Chinese Central Bank, PBOC. So we have some opportunities to work with both international and international public finance providers, including IFC. About 10 years ago, we had a collaboration with IFC on the Thioye program, which is the energy efficiency increment program. IFC chose 7 banks in China to work on it, and we are one of them. So we also have collaboration with the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank and the New Development Bank, and we're also in the discussion with several more on the way. So back to your question, Jalan. I think the reason we were looking at the collaboration and partnership between the private sector and the public sector is because we are facing a big funding gap for climate finance. It is the same in China. There are a lot of projections of the funding gap. The sort of like authoritative one is from the China's National Center for Climate Change Strategy. So from now up to 2060, for China to achieve net zero, so every year the total funding would be around like 500 to 700 billion US dollars, and the gap is around 220 billion US dollars. So it's huge. So the collaboration between the private and public finance providers are quite active in China as well. We have observed, interesting development over the past years. So we have seen a continuous increase in the amount of investment and financing mobilized from the private sector, thanks to the more public finance pouring into the climate abatement. And along with this, which more importantly, I think, we have observed more versatile and effective public interventions. Intervention means, some things provided by a public fund provider apart from the fund itself. So those interventions played a key role to create a more conducive environment for increased private sector investment and financing for climate actions. And in China, we have seen that domestic public finance has been playing an increasingly important role relative to the international development finance. The international and the domestic public finance provider collaborate more closely, but with more differing focuses, where they could use their respective expertise to the most. The domestic players' financing structure and practices are more aligned to their international peers. Meanwhile, the international player work harder to provide more bespoke financing solutions in order to stay attractive to the local government and the companies. Also, the area where the public and the private finance collaboration have becoming more diversified. Initially, they work more on the mitigation finance, but now they look out to the adaptation and client resilience. Take IFC, for example, they're not really focused on the SMEs in China, so they have come up with some innovative schemes where they invite the commercial banks to join them to provide the climate solution to the SMEs. So there's a lot going on.
Just because in the interest of time, I think we'll come back to you with some more points, but I think a good segue there was you mentioned your cooperation with more of the international financial institutions, and so I'd like to turn to Nguyen and understand a bit more. Now you have this intriguing title of Chief of Climate Finance Product Development, which sounds like a very, very innovative kind of work. So what are you doing there at IFC to kind of allow more finance through regional and local banks, like in Bank of Jiangsu, for example, and what's been the experience also compare different regions, like maybe what trends do you see in product development and implementation across different regions? Thank you.
Thank you. So yes, I'm glad to see the Bank of Jiangsu here. And so my name is Quyen, and I'm sitting in the Sustainable Finance Unit of the Financial Institution Group of IFC. So the Financial Institution Group is responsible for half of IFC lending each year. So to put it in perspective, in the last fiscal year ending in June 2024, we committed $56 billion, right? And 40% of that went to climate programs. And of the $56 billion, 60% came from our own account, but the other 40% came from other investors that we mobilized, right? So my teams and others, teams sitting in the regions, we work with commercial banks, with non-bank institutions. We create investment facilities for them to on-lend to corporate, to SMEs, to households, trying to promote the green finance, the energy efficiency project, renewable projects, green building, climate smart agriculture. But at the same time, in addition to the investment facilities, we also create the advisory program, the technical assistance program, in partnership with many of the donors, including the Swiss government, SIDA, right, Propaco. And what we see is that you need to bring not only funding. Everyone is talking about funding gaps, right? But we can align all the investors in the developed economies. But if you don't have credible projects and pipelines in emerging markets, you cannot deploy the funding, right? And investors and asset owners, project owners have to be able to build a trusting relationships in terms of where my money will go, what kind of impact I would see, where the transparencies comes into the picture, right? So IFC is used to, we started to create the kind of mobilization platform, firstly with the GEF, when we created the China Energy Efficiencies Financing Program. So we mobilized public funding to use as first loss in risk-sharing facilities to allow the banks to address their perceived risk of getting into energy efficiency or renewable financing. So that was 10 years, 15 years ago. Now they are comfortable with that. But there are others, new asset class that they are not familiar with, especially in the context today we are talking about transition. What is considered transitions in Europe might be completely different in the developing context, where all the countries are struggling with their structural issues, right? So it's not that easy to tell them to get out of coal, to get out of fossil fuel. They still have to grow the economies to meet the demands of their growing populations. So our banks are struggling, whether they are going with the international movement or they are going to listen to their governments, who many of them haven't put up their hands for net zero's commitment yet, right? And every time we have the conversation with the banks on transition, they always tell us that, show us how to create a transition plan and tell us what is credible and what is not. And then all sort of risks that we are facing, who's going to be there with us, right? So you might hear about the platform that IFC created, I think 5 or 6 years ago, called MCPP, the Managed Co-Lending Portfolio Programs, where we really use our partnerships approach to bring in insurance partners, right? So we use the credit insurance policy with our insurance partners that allows IFC to make larger investment in senior loan, in A loans and bonds to companies and financial institutions in emerging markets. And in the first rounds of the MCPPs, when we set it up, it was only 1 billion in size. The second phase, it increased to 2 billion. And last year, we launched the third round is 3.5 billion. And with that 3.5 billion, IFC will be able to lend 7 billion to the emerging market private sectors. And in the second round of the MCPP, we had only 6 insurance partners in the program. In the last rounds, we were able to bring in 13 insurance partners, including some from the public sectors. So you can see that the problems that we are facing today is too big for the public sectors to address it alone, or the private sector to address it alone. So we really need the partnership between the real sector economies, the financial institutions, the public sectors like the UN, the bilateral donors, and the private sectors, financial institutions like Propaco, AFD, and IFC, and EBRD as well, right?
Thank you very much for those concrete examples of effective financial sector cooperation and leveraging. I think this is a good segue because, as you said, it's not only about capital. Yes, capital is important, we need it, but technology also, because we're not going to achieve our net zero targets without much more technological innovation and technology transfer. So I'll turn to now my good old friend Massamba. tell us a little more about this innovation hub and what role do you see for financing technology innovations and transfers and the investment that's required for that? And what kind of incentives do you think can be put in place by governments and public sector financiers for more of that kind of work by the private sector for green technology transfer and innovation? Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn, and very pleased to be here to have this opportunity to interact, and good afternoon to all of you. The Global Innovation Hub is an initiative of the UNFCCC secretariat launched at COP26 with a one-fold vision. How do we leverage innovation to serve the many people while keeping human activities within the planetary boundaries? And when I say to serve the many people, I mean to serve the many people, no one being left behind. And we have a threefold vision, a threefold core value that you will understand maybe later why we are focusing in these three core values. They are caring, sharing, and daring. And these three core values are absolutely needed if we want to have the type of radical collaboration that we want to undertake the sustainability transition. Of course, technology is needed. Innovative technologies are needed for the sustainability transition for a very simple reason. We did not shift from horse to combustion car by taxing the horses. Policy is important, but we need to be aware that policy alone cannot make the change happen unless you have innovative solution that people can adopt. You cannot change their way of their behavior and their way of living. So you have first to bring a solution, an innovative solution, and then use policy or regulation to shift behavior. So it means that innovation will be absolutely needed. Now, what we have seen so far is that our approach to technology innovation is not very suitable in terms of climate and sustainability. The approach that we have used so far is what I will call product push innovation, where you innovate and you look for use cases. This is to be done, but we need to be mindful that will not be enough to address the climate and sustainability challenge. Another thing is to use technology innovation in a reactive manner. There is a problem, we react by innovating to solve the problem, like COVID vaccine. This is also good, but we need to be aware that it will not be sufficient to address the type of big challenge that we are facing. To address this challenge, we need to have a more vision-driven approach to innovation, where we paint the futures that we would like to build in 10 years, 20 years' time, and we backcast from that future and turn it into concrete innovation we need to invest in. And this is why when you said before that we need to define where to put the money, that's a very important subject. Because one thing is to have the finance, another thing is to know how to use them in a wise manner. They are scarce, so we need to be sure that we are putting them where they will make the most impact. The reality is that currently, we do not have a structured approach that will enable us to identify what are the innovative solutions in which we need to invest. This is because we have not done this backcasting exercise that will translate the climate goal and the SDGs into priority area where we need to invest in terms of developing innovative solutions so that we have the highest impact. And to conclude, one important aspect also is that when we say innovation, it's not just about technology innovation. technology innovation will play a very important role, but it will not be sufficient. If you focus only on technology, what will happen is you will develop solutions, but you will not deploy them at scale. We need to have a more integrated approach where innovative technology are combined with innovative policies, innovative financial instruments, innovative business model, innovative cooperative approach, because radical collaboration is needed, and also innovative product from the culture and creative industry. Art has a role to play because we want also to change the behavior. It's only if we have all these different type of innovative solution integrated in a cluster that we can respond satisfactorily to the challenge. Because we need to keep one thing in mind: we have to reinvent our industry, we have to reinvent our economy, we have to reinvent our society, and we have to reinvent ourselves.
Thank you so much. And I think we're listening very much to these interwoven and interrelated types of innovations and models for cooperation that really are looking at the policy level, looking at structuring at a transactional level. And then, you know, as Quyen was saying, like, we sometimes just also, like, they're not products that exist yet in the market. So we need to really look at what companies need, what individuals are looking for, but also what's the demand out there from the investor community. And I think this is a great platform here at Building Bridges at UNEP FI to hear directly also from that community and say, like, what do we need in order to effectively allocate and deploy more capital towards these kinds of technologies and climate strategies. So we're not supposed to have question and answer, but I really don't like panels that don't have interaction from the floor. So even though we don't have mics, I'd be happy to take one or two burning quick questions. If you can, I'll start here and we can go in the back. We'll try to take three, but just be very, very quick because we do want to have some time for some final remarks from the panel.
So Mary Jean Buer from the Business School Lausanne. I used to work at the IPCC secretariat at UNEP FI back in a long time ago, 1997, 96. Anyway, 98. Anyway, long time ago when it just started. Anyway, so my question is about co-creation and design thinking, because this is what I've been teaching at EPFL the last couple of years, and we found it very useful in the engineering field with, especially the energy sector, so complicated, trying to develop new business models, develop new, partnerships also, between companies to deal with things like green hydrogen, these kinds of things, synthetic fuels, power to X, very difficult things to make happen. And they're useful tools to use design thinking, co-creation, and so on, getting people to work together. Have you seen that? I've seen it in engineering, I've seen it here at EPFL, around the community, the industry, and so on. Have you seen those kind of methods being used in the investment community, where investors are sitting down and talking to people and actually co-creating and not just talking
the World Bank's
but
Innovation
actually working
Lab
together
and things like
to
that.
find solutions and new business models? That's the question.
Okay. Good question. I think before taking that, so we'll go to the gentleman in the back, and the first in the very back, and then in the near back. But please be very quick. We don't have a lot of time, so go directly to the question.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Adebayo from UNICEF. I really want you to kind of expand more on that product push innovation that you talked about from the Global Innovation Hub from UNFCCC. What does that mean actually concretely, and how are you going about it? Thanks.
Okay, great. And then our last question from this gentleman. And after the questions, we'll just have 1 minute sort of final remarks from each panel to wrap up.
Thanks so much. My name is Stan Pauw, and I'm with ASR Real Assets Investment Partners, and I happily take the opportunity from an investor perspective. The burning question I have is with regard to risk profiles, because it's sometimes a hurdle to overcome for our clients, which are pension funds and insurance companies. They have, like I said, target allocation, but new technologies and innovation with regard to, well, for example, real estate greening is often not in their risk profile setting. So I'm wondering if there's any solutions on how to overcome risk profile with public cooperation. Thank you.
Okay, so Massamba, I'll turn to you first about the...
Yeah, I'll try at least to cover the two questions, the one related to co-creation and system design. I fully agree with you, this is central to the sustainability transition. Now, if you want to have radical collaboration and co-creation among all these entities that do not necessarily have the same interest, we need to come up with innovative business models. Innovative business models that are able to maximize the creation of value for all these different entities. I agree with you, if you bring the private sector, philanthropy, and the public finance, they do not have necessarily the same interest, yet they have to collaborate. So it means that we need to be innovative and come up with innovative business model that can make them work together because value is created for all of them. Now, on the issue of product push innovation, what we mean by that is the fact that currently innovation is done somehow randomly. People in their laboratory develop innovative solution, and once they have the solution, they look for use cases. What I will use my solution for. This is good, but in climate and sustainability, we need to have a different approach that is more suitable, that is starting from where we would like to be in the future, starting from the end. What is the objective that we would like to achieve, and backcasting and turn that vision into concrete innovation that are needed. If you do not do that, you will not identify where to put priority in terms of investing in solution. Maybe I will.
Well, I'll also add just to that, like there's a climate finance labs. You might want to look that up because they've had several rounds of challenge grants and kind of collaborative thinking workshops. Also, as I mentioned, the World Bank has just started a kind of innovative private investment lab, which of course is looking beyond climate, but you know, to the broader sustainable development financing. And I think we're seeing more and more of that, more and more sort of public and international financial institutions getting involved in accelerators and these kind of innovation challenges, working with different actors. I'm going to then ask Nicolas maybe if you have thoughts about the question about how to get, you know, longer-term institutional investors on board and what kind of role public financial institutions and development banks can play in mitigating some of the risks that they would face to be more involved.
Yeah, thank you very much, Glenn. But I also want to answer the question on innovation and on risk profile because I think it's super important. On the innovation, you're right. There are many incubators, innovators, and actually we launched one within Financing Common to work on the climate resilient debt clauses, on debt swap, on local currency financing, and on carbon markets. And we just opened a call for projects for, of course, public development banks, but also for private sector projects. You can be funded up to $500,000. So just we will be happy to receive any thought and any innovative ideas. And because we know, of course, we have the public money, but without the private sector involvement, we will not be able to bridge the gap we are discussing in this panel. And to come back on the risk appetite and on the risk profile, I don't know if you're aware, but with 40 public development banks, we have set up the GEMS database. It's a database where all the public development banks put their data. It's of course anonymized by a category of lenders, but you can find, if you want, like a project of PV in the South African region, you will see the risk profile, the probability of default, and the loss given defaults we are facing. It's free and it's public, so it's really something that we are counting on to attract more private sector to demonstrate that sometimes the perceived risk is not the real risk, and it's sometimes lower than the one that is perceived.
Sorry, can I quickly respond to the question on the risk profile? I'm very glad you touched on the risk, because normally we talk about how the mobilization, the catalyzation, but very few people would talk about the risk. And I'm trained as a financial engineer, so I do look into the risk. Of course, I think Nicolas mentioned a lot. There's a lot for the public finance provider to do to mitigate the risk, but the commercial institutions themselves need to understand the risk themselves. Of course, as I normally joking around with my colleagues, banks initially invest in the green, now invest in the clean, and in the future probably will invest in the lean, right? And as we move along, and this profile has changed and become more complex. So I think the conventional asset pricing theory might need to evolve as well. There has been some research done in this area. Just one thing I'd like to point out. It's very important for a different type of financial institutions come together to kind of establish this kind of setup for the risk, for example, the climate risk, to transfer between like banks to insurers to guarantors, and that's kind of missing from the equation now. And I really hope this a lot more financial institutions can look into this, and that's really needed by the commercial financial institutions to be able to do that.
Quyen, do you have any thoughts about just the gentleman in the back talking a little bit about what's involved practically in terms of developing new products for financial institutions, and how do you work together with different entities in the ecosystem to bring to life those new products?
Right. So this also addressed the co-designing question as well, right? So when we design the kind of fund vehicles to try to crowd in the institutional investors, we normally work together with them. For example, when we launched the largest green bond fund, together with Amundi, right? It was 1.4 billion US dollars to invest in green bonds issued by financial institutions in emerging markets. So we actually work very closely with Amundi, and we concerned with different institutional investors. We ask them what makes you comfortable to come in and what makes you hesitant. So then eventually we have to change the structuring part of the fund, and IFC actually has to come in the junior chains and also the mezzanine chains together with other DFIs, so that the institutional investor would be more comfortable to come in with the senior chains, right? So we provide the risk cushion for the institutional investor to come in, because they trust that we understand the emerging markets and we have the higher risk appetite than a lot of institutional investors out there. But on the other hand, we also, and that became the model that when we set up the following funds, the Regio Fund with HSBC, the Avatar Funds for blue economies with T. Rowe, it's all the consultative process, co-design, right? And on the other end, we don't really want to also rely on only fund creations, right? So we also try to bring our financial institution into capital market, so they can issue directly to investors in the market. And the reason I'm here this week, not only for this conference, but we actually have the training program for 45 bankers from more than 30 banks from Africa, Asia, Middle East. They came to learn about the transition finance, transition bonds, sustainability linked bonds, right? In the past 5 years with the green bond market development programs, we already trained 2,000 bankers from more than 360 financial institutions. Many of them were able to issue sustainable bonds, green or social or sustainability bonds, the use of process bonds. And some of them issues to the DFIs, but many of them issues in local currency for the domestic investors, or the issues in public offering directly to other funds or other investors, right? So that is what we see, that we can try to diversify the source of funding for our clients. And the next frontier is really about how to design the transition finance, right? And what kind of incentives we can create to incentivize not only our banks, but also the corporate clients of our banks that really need to embark on the transition. And we really need the public funding to create the risk cushion and also to create the performance incentives for those who really want to put up their hands and follow the net zero's pathway.
Thank you. I mean, this is a huge topic, and I'm sure we haven't done it justice, but just to say that, you know, I would encourage you all to interact further with these very distinguished panelists after the break, and also just again to advertise, I put on the water cooler table the QR codes for some of those reports that have been put out by DESA in support of the 4th Financing for Development Conference. And just to make another plug as a moderator to take the prerogative, we have a public-private sort of cooperation platform as well, which I lead in DESA, which is called the SDG Investment Fair. And you can also find on our website more information about that. But essentially, it is an arena for partnership building and collaboration between the private sector and the investment community, and governments and other actors who are really trying to develop sustainability-aligned impact projects. So I think there are a lot of different modes out there, and I think the whole theme of these past week, the biggest theme of all is nobody can do this alone. We really need collaborations across the public-private spectrum. We need really to bring everybody together, everyone in the different aspects of the financing ecosystem together, and that some of the risks that they're facing to become part of the solution can only be borne by public entities. And so we need to really understand what's the best value proposition, and what's the most effective way for them to use the scarce resources they have, the scarce taxpayer resources they have, to make some of those innovations and financial solutions really work in practice on the ground. I think that's what we're all looking for. So thanks very much for your attention. Please do take a flyer over there. And thanks, I want to give our panel a great round of applause.